Thank you so much, Suzanne. Oh my goodness. Our story this morning comes from Greek and Roman mythology, and it's about the demigod Charon, or Charon in Greek. So Charon was said to be the ferryman on the river Styx. So Charon had a big stick that he would use to put on the bottom of the river and push the boat across. And that boat went between the world of the living and the world of the dead. So in ancient Greek mythology, it was believed that when a person died, they would have to leave this world, the world of the living. But naturally, having never been to the other side before, they needed a guide, someone to show them the way, someone to keep them company as they crossed. And this is a very common ancient myth. Many ancient cultures believed that someone, some kind of figure or spirit, would be there waiting for you after you died to meet you and guide you to wherever you were going. Now, in the Greek version, Charon was kind of like an angry taxi driver. He was very grumpy in most of the stories. He was angry and he was tired of everyone's questions. Just sit down and wait in the boat. I'll get you there. No more questions. And I found myself wondering if it was because Charon never got to set foot on either shore. He couldn't go to the world of the living because he wasn't a living person, but he also never set foot on the shores of the dead and didn't know really what was over there. All he knew was the river in between, ferrying people back and forth, keeping them company on their journey. In the ancient Greek stories, there are so many stories where a living person does wind up going to the world of the dead. Either they have to rescue someone, or they're on a mission, or they've got a question, and they wind up convincing Charon to take them. So it wasn't unheard of, but you always had to go through Charon. I find it really poignant that he couldn't set foot on either shore, but was willing to consider taking someone along with him. People used to bury their dead with a coin to pay the fare to get across, to assure a safe journey, a safe final trip somewhere. And Charon came to mind for me just a few days ago because I found a hummingbird in distress on my patio. It was clearly very sick, and I'll cut right to the chase. Hummy Boy is fine. He's going to be re-released from the wildlife sanctuary today. But I found myself ferrying this little creature from somewhere that I did not understand, the world of the hummingbirds, something I have no access to, ferrying it just for this little point in time to the wildlife sanctuary, a place that I also know nothing about. And we shared this moment in between, and I thought, my God, I'm like Charon today. But aren't we always just accompanying other people from one place to another for a little point in time and being one another's guide? That's our story for today. And though most of our kids and youth should already be at Spirit Jam and they'll hear the same story, let's sing our Spirit Jam recessional and send them our love and hold our youth in our thoughts.
For this morning's meditation, I invite us to settle into our seats just a little more deeply. Place your feet on the ground and feel the earth as that breathing of our whole planet pulses through our bodies as well. And I encourage us to think about this role of Charon and the accompaniment that we're called to, even in this time when we cannot always be together. Still, there are thresholds being crossed. There are bardos that people are waiting within to get from one side to the next. Graduations are happening. Births are being celebrated. Weddings and anniversaries, these rites of passage and the ways that we mark our journey through time together, as well as endings, the loss of things. And so in this moment, I invite us to lift up our hearts, maybe even lift up our hands in gratitude, in celebration, in acknowledgement, in suffering and sorrow, in all of this human experience that we are in, accompanying one another in right now.
We've come now to the time in our service when we share our joys and sorrows. And I'd like to say, for those of you joining us over on Facebook Live, here on Zoom, we have a lively chat box. And I know on Facebook you can type your joys and sorrows into the comments, but if you'd like to see the chat box, you have to be on Zoom. And so you might consider signing up for the church newsletter on our website, www.uueugene.org, and there will be instructions there every week. You can also get in touch with church staff for help. So all that is to say, here we have arrived at this time when we affirm one another's sacred humanity and share our joys and sorrows, either in the chat box or in the comments on Facebook. You may do so now. Will you join me in prayer or meditation or contemplation? Spirit of life, thank you for this chance to be together. Thank you for the promise of new life, the promise of renewal that we find with the changing of the seasons. Thank you for the baby ducks and geese that brighten our days, the kittens, the blossoming flowers. Spirit, even in our gratitude, we feel sorrow still for the loss of life. We hold in our hearts and ask that you hold in your limitless embrace and love all those struggling with anxiety, those missing our lost loved ones, friends, parents, those who've lost their animal companions. Spirit, please hold us. And we mourn the trips we didn't get to take. We mourn leaving our careers, even as we're excited about new possibilities. Spirit, we mourn and lament the fact that we cannot sing together. Spirit, hold us close. And still we thank you for this chance to be together. We thank you for the blessing of friends, visits from our loved ones, our relatives, those we love, even virtually, even from across a driveway. And we celebrate today those milestones and anniversaries, birthdays, and we remember what a precious gift it is to be here on this earth, sharing this time together. Amen. Blessed be.
Good morning, everyone.
Good
It
morning.
is so wonderful to be with you this morning. I have the pleasure of sharing our reading once again. Our reading comes from a poet, a modern poet, contemporary poet, Amber Tamblyn, called To a New Dawning, for our New York cities. From sun's first shine, we walk all day through a dream surreal. Our minds wander a new world from inside windowsills. We go to bed half asleep, eyes defiant for the crave of news feed, quenching our dread on the bad blood of blue light not sent from the moon. We are devastate aching. This can't be happening. A nation stationed inside the nightmare of a leader unfit for awakening. We grieve in solidarity, in solitary solidarity for our country, our New York cities. Their subways riding ghosted through the choking channels of our lungs. These throats that have known I can't breathe far before our collective chests could not. We grieve for every building of our boroughs, from Section 8 to the unfinished skyscraper's crane, buildings busting with bodies or abandoned by them, bodies that dance, bodies that sleep, bodies that virtual meet, eat, and drink, bodies that cease. We grieve the gravity of having to die alone in a city built on never having to be. And though our bridges are orphaned arches left to hold up the sky's condolences, they still do connect us. They still do connect us. Connect us to the cabin fever daughters watching over high fervored grandfathers. Connect us to the warrior first responders, nurses, and exhausted doctors. The recovering sick finally taking off ventilators. Connect us to the maskless, the homeless, the hopeless, the jobless, our locals, bars, bodegas, and the bathhouses. Our silent Brooklyn streets empty as ancient desert streams, holding only the echoes of ambulance screams. Connect us to the cherry blossoms standing guard in full blush while cops bloom ribbons of yellow tape at their gates. Us, connected by airborne whispers between walk-ups of missed rhythm, longing for the public pull of prior swagger. Us, connected by the daydream of lawless rush hour taxis rubbing up against each other's paint, kissing the ears of each other's rear views. Us, yearning for the crowded irritants of sweltering avenues, budding with beech trees and brisk walkers. Us, missing the middle fingers of strangers, the playlists of basketball courts and schoolyard sabotage, the lights bright over Broadway, lights low over the Bowery, lights out at the Chelsea where Sid did in Nancy. Us, singing love poems to neighbors over balconies, from the soapbox of apartment steps, a sireno of stoops. Connected by the density of front doors, the clanging of stream hammer pipes running through our floors like the floating notes of festival encores. Us, dreaming, still dreamers, for every future hand will shake, dap, or hold. Oh, how we will hold you, our eyes lifting from the drift, breaking open, free to a new dawning. Wake up, see how we hold you, New York cities, how we hold you, never letting go. And now Kelly and I will switch over to sing another song for you. Just one moment while we switch the sound.
Still lights burning red, hotter than hell. And I've been long gone, couldn't you tell? Smoke in the air, couldn't hide my shame. Saw it lit up on that silver screen. That full-bellied moon, she's shining on me. Yeah. She pulls on this heart like she pulls on the sea. Oh, you came on strong like some running wave. Your beauty left me broken, hungry. Left me begging to the birds for a boat or an offering. Left me saying nothing, nothing, like I always say. Well, that full-bellied moon, she's shining on me. Yeah. She pulls on this heart like she pulls on the sea. Yeah, she's shining shine on me. Well, those broken-hearted lovers, they got nothing on me.
We are blessed, even still. We are blessed. The worship theme this month was thresholds. You know, those moments in life when you've arrived somewhere, when you're leaving one thing to enter into another. And I think most religions must acknowledge these big milestones in our lives, at least birth and death, and in between, maybe coming of age, marriage, maybe mourning. All those things that Katie mentioned earlier. Acknowledging and marking out those big moments of transitions is one of the things that religion does best, I think. It helps give us shape and structure to the span of a human life so that every day is not just the same. It helps us transition from who we used to be into our new understanding of who we are after having married, after having lost someone. But if you've ever gotten divorced, you know that some thresholds can be just as large, but without the party. We cross through doorways into new parts of life or new versions of ourself, our own self, all the time. All the time. Some of which we don't even realize at the time. Like, when was the moment that a relationship began to deteriorate? When did you start to doubt? Or what was the threshold when your depression began to lift? Was it the first time you laughed again? When did you start to look forward to something again? When was the day you finally got fed up with your job and started thinking about a new career, or maybe retiring early or going back to school? When was that threshold passed? When was the day the spark took root inside your chest and began to blossom? It was only because of the pandemic that this year I got to see exactly how fast oak leaves grow. It was one day in late March or early April. It's funny, I don't think the calendar date matters, but I was sitting at my desk, this desk, on a Zoom call in my office, and I looked up and I saw that the twigs had all gotten a little bit of green at the ends. And I thought, oh, that's neat. But 2 days later, I was sitting right here at the same desk and I looked up, and all the leaves were the size of a squirrel's ear. And then 2 or 3 days later, I looked up from the same desk, still pandemic, still working from home, and they were about the size of a postage stamp. And within 2 weeks, all these oak leaves were as big as a playing card. 2 weeks. I could not believe how fast they grew. I had honestly never noticed before, and any other year, I could have blinked and missed it. I wouldn't have even noticed having crossed the threshold into spring. One day I would have looked up and said, oh, wow, it's really here, isn't it? Without noticing. And so I've been wondering about all the thresholds in our lives that we might be crossing, or the new seasons that might be flowering within us during this time of the pandemic. Not just the big ones, the ones with Hallmark cards, the birthdays and the graduations and the births, but those more subtle occasions, the ones that there is no card for. Whether we'll be more attentive to them, noticing them, having the time and occasion to stare at the leaves as they get bigger, or whether it's only going to be years later that we look back on this time and recognize this era in our lives for whatever it winds up being. I don't know. It's hard to say. But I'm reminded of this quote that actually Sharon brought up in the chat, and I was so glad to see it, that Ram Dass quote, that we're all just walking each other home, or phrased a little differently, we're all just accompanying each other home. And so I'm reminded of the need to accompany one another, even in the mystery, probably especially in the mystery of not knowing what this leafing out is going to look like, what the next era is going to be, what's on the other side of the door when we get there together. I think in a way, we can only ever travel with one another from one doorway to another. We cannot cross another person's threshold for them. If you've ever been at a death with someone you loved as they were about to transition, you know you can only go as far as the doorway with them. The crossing over is only theirs to do. It's also like every time we attend a friend's wedding, for example, we come to witness two people crossing over into this new life, this new version of themselves, and we go with them just as far as the threshold. And then we can only watch as they cross. I think in an ambiguous time like the one we're in, where the day of the week now routinely trends on Twitter, hashtag today is Thursday, right? Or today it would be today is Sunday, because so many people just feel unmoored from time. In a time like that, when everything is shook up, just accompanying one another, even for these little stretches of time, is so important. Every act of accompaniment can be more important than we know. I think these days we're all just doing when the Spirit says do, even if we don't know what it is that the Spirit has called us to do. And the Spirit apparently doesn't have a calendar or an app. Last week, I made my it's about bi-weekly trip to the grocery store, all masked up with my hand sanitizer. And I had to stop and get gas. And while there, I was dismayed to see ahead of me an older white-haired man, someone most at risk for coronavirus, standing outside his car, hovering over the gas station attendant defiantly, endangering her because he was wearing no mask, endangering her life and her loved ones, to hover over her, to invade her personal space. There was this aura of defiance about him, waiting for his receipt to take it from her hand. He was not going to stay in his car. And it's interactions like that that chip away at my faith, just a little bit at a time. When I see the ways that we don't accompany one another, like Haran, it's okay to be grumpy, but I'll say this about the ferryman over the river Styx. He took his job seriously, and he got everyone to where they were going safely. Those interactions, like that one at the gas station, just chip away. But while I was there, I also had to put air in my tires. That back right tire has really got to go. And when I pulled up to the pump, there was another car there. There was another older white-haired gentleman ahead of me. And when he finished at the pump, filling up all his tires, he held up one finger like this. He said, wait. And he went back in his car and got out a little container of hand sanitizer, and he held it up and showed me. And he said, wait. And then he wiped down the whole air pump, the whole digital touchpad, and he wiped down the whole hose, and he put it back. And he kind of shyly held up a hand like this, smiled, got back in his car. And tears sprung to my eyes. Tears, it's those tears that, at least for me, and I think for a lot of other people, are so much closer to the surface these days. And just in that moment, that little chip in my faith was put right back. It was restored and then some. That man, I'll never know his name, he ferried me across uncertain waters for 30 seconds, and his companionship, his accompaniment, is not one that I will forget. It mattered. That man's act of accompaniment in May 2020. And it's not exactly the river Styx, but there is a river flowing in my soul, and the waters these days tend to run high. In the time of the pandemic, I often don't know what emotional shore I'm going to wash up on from one minute to the next until I get there. I don't remember the last time I walked out the actual door of the church, not realizing how long it would be before I walked back in. It was so ordinary a moment. It did not register as anything special. I had no idea what threshold I was crossing. And it's a fact that takes on a kind of poignant sadness in retrospect, doesn't it? But how momentous will it be when we cross back through that actual doorway? And I'll say this. Knowing that the church community is holding strong beyond every physical doorway and every physical threshold, having crossed into this new time together and accompanying one another, knowing that we can do this for another year or longer, and we will still be the church. We will stay faithful to one another. If we have any conception of what faith is, now is the time, knowing we can do this. We are the faithful. Knowing that is to be set down on solid ground once again. What I'm saying is, in this time out of time, this time when we often don't know where we are or where we're going, we can accompany one another, even for a little while, maybe just as far as the front door to another person's soul, or safety, or stage of life. We can keep guard over one another, even for those little fragments of time, not knowing which, if any of them, will be the one when we suddenly leaf out into our newest, most beautiful self. Amen. Blessed be.